Hello again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final episode of Link's Awakening DX. It's been quite a journey so far, but the end is finally in sight. We have all the instruments, and all that's left is to play them in front of the Windfish's egg. Of course, before we get to that, there are a couple of optional side events that we can take part in. There is still one more photograph left to be found, and there is even an optional dungeon newly added to Link's Awakening DX. So I deliberately waited until the end in order to play that optional dungeon, by the way. I got a couple of comments asking me why I hadn't gone to see it quite yet, and the reason for that is the reward you get for completing the optional dungeon is so completely overpowered that I wanted to wait until the end, because I thought if I got it early, then it would make the game even easier than I'm already making it out to be. Anyways, about that photograph, it's actually up in the mountains, so we have to go all the way to the right, which is probably not where you'd expect to have to go. I think this screen was actually completely blank in the original version of the game, so adding a photo here, gave it actual purpose. Is there any reason to come up here? I guess there's that cave. I don't even remember what's in that cave. I haven't even seen the entirety of the map in this playthrough because a couple parts of the map don't really offer any permanent rewards or upgrades if you go and seek them out. There's this mini-game that I didn't show off in this playthrough, and there's probably a couple of caves that I didn't go into either. They've probably just got rupees. I've got all the hearts, all the seashells, I've got the level 2 sword, and we're getting to that optional dungeon eventually. So now that I've got all the photos, I think it's time we took a look at the photo album to burn the images into our heads so that we don't forget when Link eventually wakes up from this dream. The Travels of Thief? Okay. So it turns out that when you steal from the shop, it causes the game to refer to you as Thief from then on, which is kind of funny and ruins certain scenes. But I suppose we'll get to those eventually. So here's all of the photos, including the Marin photos that you can potentially miss out on. A photo of this guy, who I never talked to once throughout the game. The Chain Chomp, always a classic. And, how did you get that photo? This is slander, I tell you. That photo should not be there. In order to get 100% completion, you do in fact have to steal from the shop at least once. It's a very interesting choice for them to make. And if you want to do a deathless run of the game, you have to never enter the shop again because the shopkeeper gets very angry when you steal from him, it seems. But he doesn't go after you, he just waits in the shop for you to try and buy something again. So, I haven't visited the library quite yet. There's a couple of books that are basically tutorials, but there's also that book on top of the shelf which you have to get by ramming into the shelf with the Pegasus boots, just like A Link to the Past. This book is actually exclusive to Link's Awakening DX. It tells you how to unlock the optional dungeon, and you can technically unlock it as soon as you have the power bracelet because you need it to move the gravestones. However, you can only find this hint once you have the Pegasus boots. Meanwhile, we have another interesting book here. This one can only be read if you have the magnifying lens. I don't think the ink is invisible, it's just the print is so tiny that you need a magnifying lens. So you're using the magic magnifying lens as a regular magnifying glass. It's interesting. The book tells you a combination that you need in the final area of the game, so I jotted it down while I was recording because the combination is actually randomly generated for each player. However, if I recall correctly, it's actually only generated the instant you read the book, so if you never read the book, then you could just use the same combination in every playthrough. At least I think you could. I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I read that was possible, so maybe I'm just misremembering. So, there are a couple of upgrades that I missed throughout the entire playthrough and would have been very thankful to have way earlier, so thanks a bunch for not telling me, commenters. Nah, I'm just kidding. I'm sure you guys forgot about all this too. I mean, who would think to lift that one single rock in the mysterious woods as soon as you have the power bracelet? Certainly not me. So when you sprinkle a little bit of powder on this pedestal, it causes something to happen similar to when you get the magic upgrade in A Link to the Past. This little guy comes out and says he's going to curse you with expanded inventory space. Well, what's actually interesting to me is that you can actually choose what to upgrade by rejecting his initial offer, and he will cycle between offering expanded magic powder, expanded bombs, or expanded arrows. Personally, I recommend going for expanded bombs first, because those are going to be very annoying to refill when you eventually run out. It's quite an expansion as well. If you get all of these upgrades, of which there are 3 in total, you can carry 60 bombs, 60 arrows, and 40 magic powder, which is, I know it sounds great, but to be perfectly honest, it's more of a convenience than anything else, because it just means you get more time between having to go back and restock any of these items. Because to be perfectly honest, limiting the quantity that you're allowed to carry doesn't matter a whole lot when there's usually a refill sitting nearby for you to pick up in case you run out. Because they wouldn't want you to run out of any of these items and then be unable to progress, right? I mean, I think the only time that running out of bombs is a threat is when you're fighting Facade, because he's only vulnerable to bombs if I remember correctly. Anyways, there's another one of these upgrades here, and there is a third upgrade up in the mountains somewhere, but I did not bother finding it because, to be perfectly honest, you only need to upgrade bombs and arrows. Magic powder is not used nearly enough throughout the game in order for me to consider upgrading it actually useful, which is something that I find questionable throughout the entire series post-Ocarina of Time. Like, why are you limiting the quantity of items that you can carry when there's usually going to be a refill for those items nearby when you need it? I actually kind of like that A Link Between Worlds did away with ammunition completely and just had that stamina meter, and that's what I used in my Zelda fan game as well. You should totally check out my Zelda fan game, by the way, it's really great. Memories of Hyrule, look it up on my channel. Now then, onto that optional dungeon, which can be unlocked by pushing these gravestones in this specific order. The order is the same on every playthrough, unlike the combination that we got from the other book at the library. And it's actually very easy to figure out this combination because you make a sort of pattern on the ground here with the gravestones. So once you've done that, you can enter the color dungeon. They were very proud of the fact that they made a portable game in color that didn't take a bunch of batteries. So this dungeon is themed around color, which is actually interesting because the developers of the 2 Oracle games have talked about the different concepts that they had for those games before settling on Ages and Seasons, and one of those concepts was color, which you can kind of see in Oracle of Ages because there are a lot of color-based puzzles in that game. That first puzzle basically exists to stop anybody from playing this on a regular old Game Boy, but if they got lucky, they would probably be able to guess the colors anyways. Ah well, after solving this very easy puzzle, we get, "Oh, the compass again! I can't believe this! They got me with a compass one more time," which means they're gonna get me with a map and a bunch of keys one more time. Okay, so this room, we have a unique enemy exclusive to this dungeon, actually, and these trampoline floors will break and create holes if you touch them while they are red. And in this room, you basically have to put the colored balls into the correct holes, so if you're playing this on a regular Game Boy, I guess you would have to get lucky here as well. There's your stone beak, in case you need a clue to any of these puzzles, but as long as you think in color, I guess you'll be completely safe. This enemy here seems like it was ripped out of Yoshi's Island, if you can believe it. It just really reminds me of one of the Yoshi's Island enemies. Anyways, we defeat them and head into the next room where we find a chest with a key in it, and that one-way door will take us right back to where we can find a locked door to continue the dungeon. Nice and convenient, unlike some of the designs of the later dungeons in this game. I think they intend for you to play this way earlier, so it's not as difficult to say Turtle Rock. Anyways, in this room we have a mini-boss. There are actually a couple of mini-bosses throughout the dungeon. This guy doesn't have a color theme to him, but he can apparently only be hurt by either bombs or I think spin attacks as well. I'm gonna use bomb arrows, I like doing that. But then I accidentally plant the bomb, which means you can't shoot a bomb arrow. So that was weird, but he goes down in only a couple of bombs, so that's okay. Not really a color theme to that particular enemy. Ah, it seems that the enemies can use these trampoline floors as well. We gotta find the switch without making a bunch of holes. Otherwise, we have to exit the room in order to reset all of those trampolines. And this room, oh my god, I completely failed at this puzzle. I am so sorry. You're gonna see me wig out on this puzzle before I skip to the part where I actually figure out the solution. Yeah, it seemed like it should have been a very easy puzzle. I've seen this kind of thing before, but apparently turning all of the little orbs to red doesn't work. They all have to be blue. And I should have realized that the solution was sitting right in front of me as well, but it took a bunch more time than it should have. And then I finally figure it out here, I think. Just hit the center one, and then, yeah, I guess that works. Really annoying puzzle. I don't know how I failed at it so spectacularly. And then we get to a room with a locked door, which means I have to go all the way back and search for another key. So let's move on with this dungeon. Just a bunch of gels in the floor. And in this next room, we find... Oh, if you kill all the enemies, you'll get a chest. I forgot about that. And they got me with a Guardian Acorn again. So this room is where the map is. I guess that's a little bit helpful in case you need to backtrack or something. And in this room, you can see what the puzzle is. You have to get all of these guys into the correctly colored hole. But something rather strange happened in this room. And I think you'll see it in just a couple of seconds. I guess with so many objects on the screen, it was inevitable that some kind of bug would occur in here, right? So I throw the ball into the red hole, and it should have just gone into the hole, but instead it vanished completely. Like, I guess the game got confused because it not only hit the hole, it hit the enemy right next to it at the same time. So I'm guessing that's what happened, but I've never seen something like that happen before. Very strange. Anyways, you just have to exit and re-enter in order to reset all the enemies in case something like that happens. So... yeah, just throw all the guys into the holes. When you're throwing them, you have to make sure that you don't overshoot the throw, because Link only throws a fixed distance, whether you're moving or not. So keep that in mind when you throw them into the holes, and you get a key, which means we can backtrack to where the locked door was and continue on the journey. And in this room, we have the boss door, which means I'm going to have to go back and find the boss key. You know, sometimes I wish they would kind of guide the player towards the boss key before they could possibly find the boss door. I know that doesn't make for a very interesting dungeon design, but I'm just tired of finding the boss door without the key and having to backtrack in order to find it. I've had that happen several times in the main dungeons. It's getting annoying. And here's a mini-boss that I do not understand one bit. So he says that normal sword strikes won't work, but I just hit him with a sword, technically. I mean, it was the sword beam, so I guess that's not exactly the sword, but whatever. I think to try the magic powder, because that's the only other item we haven't used so far, and then he jumps into the air, and suddenly the sword works again. So, I don't know what was up with that guy. I guess I'm fighting him way too late into the game. I was probably meant to only have certain items for that fight, but there's your boss key, finally. So we can get on with the rest of this dungeon, and finally fight the main boss of the dungeon, who hopefully will be color-themed in a meaningful way. Maybe. So let's see what he's all about. And if the crystal switch is not in the correct position, all you have to do is hit it with a bow or something. I mean, I have the bow now, but, you know. So apparently with this guy, the color on his head is just his health meter. You just have to hit him a bunch until he turns red, and then you're totally okay. Or maybe he gets more aggressive the more you hit him, and you have to get away from him for a little bit to let the color go back to normal, and his health bar is completely independent. But I defeated him while he was red, so that didn't amount to much. I guess that was a little bit disappointing. I mean, it's totally cool for there to be a completely optional dungeon in the new version of the game, but that really wasn't much of a dungeon. Maybe it's because I had the level 2 sword and a bunch of hearts, so there was no chance of this being a challenge. But now the rest of the game doesn't have any chance of being a challenge. Your reward for completing this is a choice of one of 2 tunics. The blue one will reduce the damage you take, and the red one will increase your attack power. It's actually kind of like having a permanent piece of power or Guardian Acorn, depending on what color you picked. And having a permanent piece of power with a level 2 sword, kind of a monstrous idea, wouldn't you say? You can just destroy everything in the game. Nothing is going to stop you. That's why I waited until the end of the game to get this. The final boss is going to be a cakewalk, but at least the rest of the game wasn't as much of a cakewalk as it could have been, right? I guess that makes sense to some people. So moving on, now we can finally head up the mountain and play the instruments in front of the Windfish's egg. There is nothing left besides upgrading my magic powder if I feel like it, which I really don't. And I suppose there's, no, all of the seashells disappeared as soon as I got the level 2 sword, so there's none of those left at all. I have a feeling you were supposed to get this message from the owl way sooner, because you could potentially come up here and see the egg long before you were meant to be up here. We're going to play the Ocarina and the Ballad of the Windfish in front of the egg. This is the only use the Ballad of the Windfish has when it's played from the Ocarina. And luckily, we don't have to worry about playing all of the instruments at the same time because they all just appear and start playing themselves, apparently. And can I just say that this is one of the most epic set pieces in the entire game? Playing this music in front of the egg like this, I don't know, for some reason it feels like a really powerful moment because it's heralding the very end of the adventure. So I kinda like it. And if you do not have all of the instruments, of course nothing is going to happen, and in fact this little tune here will be missing whatever instruments you have not picked up yet. So I think it's possible to get the instruments maybe out of order by not taking them from the dungeons as soon as you can. So that might be interesting to experiment with, if you wanted to, like, isolate all of the instruments in this song. So with the song concluded, suddenly the egg cracks. It's not over, however. The Windfish wasn't inside the egg, and he wasn't waiting to hatch, technically speaking. No, we have to enter the egg where there is one final mini-dungeon of sorts. It's not a full dungeon, which is kind of unfortunate. It's not the first time the final dungeon of the game has been on top of a mountain, nor would it be the last. I mean, think about it. We're jumping into a pit where the final dungeon is located. Does that remind you of any more modern Zelda games, maybe? Anyways, the combination we got at the library is actually directions through this sort of Lost Woods segment. The passageways loop over and over again until you go in the direction that the book said to go in. Or you never read the book at all and just enter the combination that anybody can use as long as they've never read the book. Or so I remember. Once you go through the correct passageways, the hole leading to the final boss is right in front of you. However, I decided to hang around here for a brief moment because this song that you're hearing right now actually goes on for a little bit, longer than you would normally spend in this area of the game, because once we jump down there, the final boss starts. So if you want to listen for a moment, I will let you do so. I think it's a really interesting take on the Ballad of the Windfish. Nice and spooky, right? I'm sure it'll sound nicer if you play the game for yourself and listen to it. Anyways, now there's nothing left but to just jump into the final boss arena here. It's a short room with the Windfish painted on the floor, and the Nightmare is actually sitting right underneath Link when the battle starts, which I think is really spooky and a nice effect. This is the final Nightmare boss rush. The Nightmare is going to take on several forms, and we have to go through each and every one of them. It's a nice, epic conclusion to the game. However, now that I've got all of these upgrades and everything, this is actually going to be really, really easy. This first form is simply a giant blob that you have to use magic powder on. I'm not sure how anyone was meant to figure that out. So this isn't really affected by me having the level 2 sword. But once you have destroyed this first form, he changes. And the form he now takes is actually really interesting. It's actually Aghanim from A Link to the Past, yet another relic of this game's history as in A Link to the Past port. But it's also very interesting because this could indicate that the Nightmare is drawing from Link's own trauma in order to take on its battle form. And it's just as annoying as the Aghanim fight as well. Like with Aghanim, you have to reflect his attacks back at him. However, he can randomly choose to throw out an attack that you cannot reflect. I'm pretty sure he throws out these attacks in a fixed order in A Link to the Past, but it's completely random here, as far as I remember. And of course, he does not have the super lightning attack that was always really easy to dodge anyways. After destroying the Aghanim form, he changes into the Moldorm, which was already used as the first boss of the game. But I suppose the Moldorm was so annoying that it was worth repeating once just to reignite the trauma, right? So after a couple of spin attacks against him, at least there isn't a hole you can fall into, right? He changes into Ganon, which I think is actually really cool. The Ganon form can't be damaged by regular sword strikes. You have to use the Pegasus boots and dash into him. This is sort of reminiscent of A Link to the Past, where the Master Sword couldn't do any damage to Ganon unless you used a spin attack or had one of the sword upgrades. But here you have to use the Pegasus boots, or at least most players use the Pegasus boots. I actually just remembered that spin attacks work here as well, even if you have the level 1 sword. And then the Nightmare turns into a Lanmola, which you hit once with a Fire Rod and he's done, and then you have the Shadow Deathel form, which is actually supposed to be called Death Eye, because he's got that eye in the center, and he's basically a giant Goma with swinging arms that you have to jump over while shooting him in the eye. However, if you have the Boomerang, you can kill him in one hit. Why is the Boomerang, of all things, so powerful? It's really strange. I feel like there could have been a lot more to that final boss, but I suppose part of it is due to me picking up all of the items and upgrades and making this really easy for myself. I mean, seriously, that form probably would have been a lot harder had I actually gone through the trouble of actually jumping over those arms and shooting him with a bow. But then again, I did have the secret medicine all this time, so I still would have had basically double the amount of life that you see on the screen there. I remember this being difficult when I was a kid, so I suppose the difficulty is not that much of a problem. Also, nice reference by the owl to the virtues of the Triforce: wisdom, courage, and power. So with all of the nightmares defeated, the dream can finally be over, the Windfish is going to awaken, Link can return to Hyrule or wherever he was trying to go, and we can finally move on to some other game. I mean, as fun as Link's Awakening was, when you get to the end of the game, there's sort of a sense of relief there, as it means you can finally move on to something else, do something different. Maybe that's why beginnings and endings are a thing in this world. What a profound statement. The Windfish has a really epic design if you ask me. He's never appeared in any other Zelda game besides, like, Hyrule Warriors. But in Skyward Sword, they have a giant whale creature that might be some kind of an allusion to the Windfish. But, for real, nobody's ever gone into detail in this series about what the Windfish's purpose in the world is, why its dreams become reality. Or at least as far as we know, his dreams become reality, because there's actually a bit of ambiguity here as to whether or not Link dreamed up this entire thing, whether or not the Windfish and Link were sharing a dream. I think it's a shared dream, personally. And as we say goodbye to the island and play the song one last time, I should actually point out that in the Switch remake of the game, the Windfish's dialogue is actually altered slightly in order to better clarify that the Windfish is basically saying that just because the dreamer wakes up and the island goes away doesn't mean that it's gone forever. It still exists. Whether in another dream or in the memory you keep in your heart, it's still there. That screen looked a little bit weird. With Terran and the mushroom, it looked a little bigger than it normally does. Anyways, everything disappears and presumably Link falls into the ocean after this. Away it goes. But as I said, the memory is going to be in our hearts forever. And Hyrule Warriors. Marin's still going to exist in that at least, right? So is that like the spout on the head of the Windfish or something that caused all of that water to gush? That's an interesting thought. Ah, the open seas. So, Windfish, you going to give Link a hand here? Maybe get him back to Hyrule? Because he can't exactly get back on just one log, can he? I mean, I know Link is crafty in Tears of the Kingdom, but there's not exactly a lot to work with, and he doesn't have Ultra Hand. So, who's playing that music? I see Link has, in fact, combined two logs into one. Maybe he does have Ultra Hand. He looks up and sees none other than the Windfish flying over him. So, all of that wasn't a dream. Maybe. Kinda, sorta. They're not clear about it, as I mentioned. But seriously, Windfish, you gonna give me a hand here? No? I don't know why Link is smiling like that. He's still stranded in the middle of the ocean. Maybe we should get the King of Red Lions over here. He'll be more helpful. Sort of. Maybe. And that's it. That's Link's Awakening DX. The credits are going to roll, and because this is an emulator, you can't exactly see the names perfectly well. Suppose I should have done something about that before recording, but no matter. So, it was a blast going down memory lane and playing this game again. Of course, with all of the experience that I've had over the years with the Zelda franchise, it was really easy to destroy Link's Awakening, basically. I really went through the game just slaughtering enemies left and right. Combat in Zelda, like after A Link to the Past, combat in Zelda is not super challenging, at least for an experienced player like me. This is something that kind of caused me to disconnect with Zelda between Ocarina of Time and, like, Breath of the Wild, basically. See, what happened was, I had basically grown up on Zelda 1, Zelda 2, and A Link to the Past, and those are all really difficult games. A Link to the Past is more fair and balanced about its difficulty, but it's still a challenge, I would say. And then from Ocarina of Time to Majora's Mask to Wind Waker to Twilight Princess, combat in Zelda basically got less and less difficult. I think it's because a lot of patterns just repeat themselves throughout every game's boss battles. Like, you're always exploiting a weak point and then slashing with a sword, and then you do that 3 times and you win the battle, and regular enemies, you can just slash at them a bunch until they're down. Skyward Sword tried to create more interesting combat, but it really didn't work with the control scheme they were going for. Maybe it's a little better on that Switch port, because obviously they wouldn't be able to have the same control scheme. And then Breath of the Wild comes out, and it encouraged more creativity in the combat, and the enemy design wasn't perfect, but it was actually really good, so I kind of like the modern Zeldas a lot more than the middle 3D Zeldas, if that makes sense. Of course, this is all coming from the perspective of somebody who used to value only the difficulty and combat in Zelda games. Nowadays, I recognize that there's a lot more to Zelda than combat and difficulty. The adventure is an important part of it as well, so I appreciate some of the middle Zelda games a lot more than I used to. And I will admit to my opinions being colored by other opinions that I found online. That's part of the reason I had the views that I did back then. Here in 2023, I actually think I'm rather excited to play Oracle of Ages and Seasons on YouTube, but I do wonder if I should go directly to those because there's 2 other games in between Link's Awakening and them. I don't think I'm ever really certain what I'm going to do next on my channel, so I suppose I will just have to leave you with the ending that you get if you complete the game without ever dying. Anyways, that concludes Link's Awakening DX, and as always, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, but I hope you'll stick around to see what it is. Later, everybody.